Hi friends, my name is Rebecca Siegel and I am coming to you from my office here in Chicago, Illinois, where we are enjoying one of our very few and rare beautiful weather days. This will make no sense to you in Orange County, but here in Chicago we get like 3 to 5 good weather days a year, and when we have them, we all have to run outside and enjoy them because every other day is either so hot that you feel like you're gonna pass out or so cold that it hurts your skin to be outside. So these very rare moments where it's tolerable outside are like a holiday for us. But anyway, while I'm here with you inside, I'm so excited to talk about my book, To Fly Among the Stars, the hidden story of the fight for women astronauts. Now, I don't know if you can tell from my background here in my office, but I'm a little bit of a space nerd. I've got my Lego Saturn V, I've got some space patches, lots of space books, space magazines, space paintings. I love talking about the history of the American crewed space program. And note, I said crewed, not manned, because women are a really important part of this history. And really their role in spaceflight begins with the women in my book. So before we get started, I just want to give a quick summary of what To Fly Among the Stars is about. So it tells the story of 20 pilots who back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, underwent astronaut testing. Now, 7 of the pilots in the book are men, guys with names like Alan Shepard and John Glenn, people you might recognize. But the other 13 pilots in the book were women. And this is the stuff I really like talking about because this is a big deal. And just to help you understand why it was a big deal that 13 women underwent astronaut testing, I want to give you a quick primer on what life was like for women back in the 1960s. Okay, so this is a time when women were still very much second-class citizens, okay? Women had a really hard time getting a credit card on their own unless they had the signature of a man to sort of verify their trustworthiness. Women couldn't get birth control unless they had the permission of their husband or dad. Women couldn't get into most Ivy League schools, and even when they got into a college, they had a hard time getting into engineering and medicine programs. You know, like medical schools didn't really want women doctors. There's a story in the book about one of the female pilots who wanted to get into an engineering school, and so she went to a college and applied. And they told her, "We don't have engineering for girls. You should go to home ec." And this was a time when women were expected to be housewives and mothers. They were supposed to spend their time baking casseroles and doing their hair. They were not supposed to be spending their time flying airplanes. But for a group of women that I talk about, that's what they wanted to do. These were women who had gotten into flying for the most part at really early ages and just had that bug. They loved flying and they did any kind of flying they could. So they flew prop planes, they flew multi-engine planes, they flew gliders, helicopters, blimps, because they had found love in aviation and they wanted to do it. Now, it was not easy to be a female pilot at this time because a lot of people didn't trust a woman could operate something as complicated as an airplane, and they didn't think that they should, you know. So women who wanted to have careers in aviation were often really limited in what they were allowed to do. So, you know, they could be flight attendants, but for these women who loved flying the planes themselves, that wasn't really enough. They could be bookkeepers for an air company. Really lucky women who were good at arguing their case might get a job as like a crop duster or flying a commuter plane or maybe as a flight instructor. But again, you know, these were women that were like, no, we like flying high and fast and far. And these were women who got really into air racing, which were these like spectacular events where they would cut weight from their airplane and then fly from one city to the next as fast as they could. And they were really competitive and amazing. And so for these women, they were constantly looking up what's the next level of aviation? Where's the next place I can take my passion and career? And for women, that was tricky at the time. For men, it was a very different story. Men could fly in the military, which meant that they had access to jets. Jets were these new type of aircraft that could go so much higher and farther than propeller planes. Men could do things like fly for the Navy and do carrier flight, which is when you take off from an aircraft carrier and then you land on the aircraft carrier. It's like really high stakes, really exciting types of flight that were not available to women. And when the prospect of spaceflight entered the lexicon, these were people who really wanted that chance. And so To Fly Among the Stars is going to tell you the story about what happened when these 13 women who underwent preliminary astronaut tests, the same medical tests that the Project Mercury male astronauts underwent and passed, when these women did their tests, they performed very well, well enough, in fact, to suggest that they might not just make good astronauts, but they might make better astronauts than men. And that was a complicated thing to present to a 1960s audience that was not ready to hear that. And what's even more interesting is that there were a lot of reasons that women would have made great astronauts back in the 1960s. And this is beyond their skills as pilots and as brave aviators, right? There were just some simple logistical reasons that women would have made good astronauts at the time. So this is a bad example because this is a Saturn V, which is much bigger than what we were talking about at the very beginning, in the Project Mercury days. But this thing on the top is the space capsule, and this down here is the rocket, right? So the space capsule, which back in the story we're talking about was the Mercury, was really small, and it required a very, very compact astronaut. The rocket itself was 82 feet tall, and it was capable of lifting its capsule up into space, but the capsule couldn't be too heavy. So at the time, every additional pound you put into that space capsule took about 1,000 pounds of rocket fuel to boost, okay? Which meant that NASA's rocket scientists were working really hard to strip weight from that capsule. They wanted to make that thing as light as possible so that this thing could do its job. So when you look at these pilots that we have who underwent their testing, you have the men and the women, and the women were weighing less than the men. Now, some of them were weighing 20 pounds less, some were 40 pounds less, some were 60 pounds less than the men, which would have been a big deal for NASA's rocket scientists. But it wasn't just their weight. These were women that were going to require less oxygen, less food, less water for their space flight. So again, it was going to be lighter. But even beyond that, women at the time were showing that they had a higher tolerance for pain, that they could withstand isolation, boredom, heat, all these things better than their male peers. And women had better heart health, which meant that they had fewer chances of having a cardiac incident in outer space. So you have this situation where you have these female pilots who are really driven, really excited about the idea of going into space, who present the perfect picture. They're smaller, they're hardier, they're more lightweight, more compact, and they've done these astronaut tests where they performed really well. And so why do we not see in the 1960s female astronauts hopping on board these early space flights? Well, the story's really complicated, and it gets very, very interesting because when society said, no, we don't want a woman in space, you should go home and bake a casserole, these women were not content with that answer. And so they took their fight all the way to the White House and beyond. And I think you'll be really interested to see exactly how they fought, where they took their fight, and what happened in the end. And I will talk to you about all of that stuff on October 22nd when we see each other. But in the meantime, please read To Fly Among the Stars. You should be able to get it at your school library or public library. If not, Amazon, Indie Books, your local bookseller should have it. And find me on Twitter. I'm Rebecca Siegel 14, or on my website, rebeccasiegel.org. I really am looking forward to hearing all of your questions. So as you're reading, please make sure to take little notes about things you want to hear more about. I'm happy to talk about my research experience, which involved crashing a movie premiere and learning to fly an airplane. Two things turns out I'm not very good at. Or I can talk about some of the funnier aspects of astronaut testing. I can talk about some of the sad things that happen to some of these characters in this book. Anything you want to talk about, please let me know. So now I'm going to go enjoy my Chicago weather. Please go and enjoy your beautiful Orange County sunshine, and I will see you soon.